everyone. I'm Averi Pakulis, Vice President for Early Childhood and Public Health Policy here at First Focus on Children. Thank you all so much for joining us today for Children's Week. This year, during Children's Week, we've been highlighting the fact that every single issue is a kid's issue. So that's everything from nutrition and immigration to foreign policy and taxes. Today, we're here to talk about something that is obviously, very obviously, a children's issue, and that's childcare and early learning. So we want to talk about the ways that childcare and early learning affect kids and their families. And we think it's also important to highlight all the ways that these issues are integral to the larger US economy and our infrastructure. And that is why we've entitled today's session, Childcare. It's not just a kid's issue. And today we are so lucky to be joined by two amazing guests and experts on these topics, Myra Jones-Taylor and Julie Kashen. Myra is the Chief Policy Officer at 0 to 3, which is a national leader on infant and toddler policy and program development. And Julie is a Senior Fellow and Director for Women's Economic Justice at the Century Foundation. And Julie has expertise in work on family issues, caregiving, economic mobility, and labor. So Julie and Myra, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
So we're just going to dig right in and start with some of the proposals we've seen recently. President Biden recently unveiled the American Families Plan in April, which would provide, among other things, $225 billion in funding that would help make childcare more affordable for families and supportive of the early learning workforce. He's proposed $200 billion to provide universal pre-K throughout the country. And he's also made childcare funding a key priority in the American Jobs Plan, and of course in his recent budget proposal as well. So we at First Focus see this as an unprecedented and really exciting moment for children, families, early learning professionals, providers, and employers, for all of us. We've all worked a long time and waited a long time to get to a place where this conversation is happening. And literally just a couple short years ago, this amount of proposed funding and the attention that we're getting right now was really unthinkable. So we're grateful to be in this place, and we want to talk about how to take advantage of that and move forward. So my first question is for both of you. I'd like to start with Myra, though. If some of the proposals that I just mentioned, Myra, were to become law, what would, in your opinion, what would that mean for children and families across the country?
So at 0 to 3, we agree with you 100%. This is truly game-changing policy that we are supportive of. It's a very exciting time from the American Jobs Plan, which would help to build out the infrastructure in terms of bricks and mortar that we need for childcare, but also extend support for care across the generations, so that making sure that we have childcare, paid leave, and home and community-based services, that's really important. So that's game-changing already. And then you add on the American Families Plan, and truly what this does is that it completely changes the way we think about how we support children and families in this country. So just to rattle off some of them, so people have a sense of that. So one, it ensures that families with low and middle income spend no more than 7% of their income on childcare, which we know across the country, so many families are paying significantly more than that. It's the same amount as their mortgage. We know that childcare is as expensive or more, actually more expensive than in-state tuition in over the majority of our states across the country. It would also develop a national comprehensive paid family and medical leave program that guarantees 12 weeks of paid leave by year 10. So that's transformative. How long have we been pushing for paid leave, right? Extending the child tax credit in the American Rescue Plan through 2025. So we want to make this permanent, but that's a huge step in the right direction. We know that the child tax credit will essentially effectively end poverty, cut poverty in half in this country. So that is talk about a game changer. And then, of course, provide early childhood educators with job-embedded coaching, professional development, and commensurate wages with their colleagues in the public school system. So this is huge, and we are really excited and all in, and want to make sure that this happens.
Thanks, Myra. Julie, I'll turn to you next, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the same question, and also specifically on the workforce, the early learning workforce, and the impact that these proposals could have on the workforce. And why is that important to kids and to the rest of us?
Thank you. It's a great question. And I echo everything that Myra said. I think she said it so well. I think in terms of the child care piece of the American Families Plan, it addresses affordability, quality for both care and jobs, and equity. And we actually know, it's estimated to provide free or reduced cost childcare for 76% of working families with children under age 6. That is a huge swath of the population. And for 5 million of those, it would be free because they're in the lowest income bracket. So I think just really important to frame it that way, that we're talking about a guarantee of affordable, high quality childcare, which is something we've needed for a really long time. And in terms of early educators, I was walking with my 7-year-old this morning, and we passed the director for his 2s and 3s program. And I congratulated her on making it through the year. And she looked at me and she said, "I'm a superhero." You are, and you shouldn't have to be, but you are, as is everyone who works in childcare and early education. I mean, these are jobs that were tough before the pandemic, and this year has been extremely challenging. During the pandemic, so many families took their children out of childcare, or childcare centers were forced to close down. And so a lot of childcare workers lost their jobs. And now it's hard to get people to come back. And that's because we have this history of not paying what these jobs are worth. That if for parents of school age kids, that who your kid's teacher is matters more than anything else. It's the same thing here. Having consistent adult relationship when you are a young child is so important. But if we're going to keep paying the child care workers $12 an hour, these early educators $12 an hour, not giving benefits, not giving them breaks, not giving them a substitute pool so that they can take time off when they're sick, right? We're going to keep losing good people. We're not going to be able to recruit the people that we need. And so, I think it's incredibly important. And the American Families Plan would do what's needed, right? It would raise wages. It would, make sure that people are being paid much better than they currently are, and make sure there's access to professional development opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that your child's teacher thinks and knows she's a superhero. You're absolutely right. She is the biggest. Those are great points. And I also love the comparison to the K-12 system, where you obsess over what teacher your child has, and absolutely the same does and should happen in the younger years. And those are just important. Thanks for that, Julie.
Yeah.
We've also heard a lot about infrastructure talk lately, of course, and we mean bridges and roads and sort of the traditional infrastructure, but we're also talking about childcare as infrastructure. And so, Myra, I was hoping that you could, I think that's a concept that doesn't resonate with everybody right away. And so, Myra, I'm hoping that you could tell us, what do we mean when we say that childcare and early learning are infrastructure?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. It's an important one to be able to address. I think it's important to think about where we've been in the midst of the pandemic the last 18 months, right? When so many reports were written and told about the challenges that public schools were facing, and they were numerous, right? But no one wrote or spoke about the collapse of the public school system. And that is because we have invested in public schools as a part of our infrastructure. It is the part of the daily fabric that communities can rely on. The same needs to be said about childcare, because there was a very different story that was being told and continues to be told. And that is, there is an existential crisis that childcare faces in this country. Before the pandemic, we know that families, 51% of all families in this country live in childcare deserts, meaning there is an inadequate supply of childcare in the community to serve the children who live there. I already said the cost of childcare is equivalent to someone's rent or mortgage. It is the top line item in so many people's budgets. And then the pandemic came and completely destroyed whatever semblance of a system we had, right? It really undermined the very fragile system that we were trying to really a non-system that families were relying on. And so to think about childcare as infrastructure really should not be that hard of a leap when you see what we've just been through. It is very clear from the number of parents, and women in particular, who have not gone back, who had to leave the workforce in the midst of the pandemic because they did not have childcare. That is the equivalent of saying they did not have a road or a bridge to get to work. They did not have the transportation to get to work. If they don't have childcare, they cannot get to work. We cannot leave our children unattended, right? So it is truly, I understand that people have a hard time wrapping their heads around it because we haven't used this terminology, but if you think about the way it is, how essential it is to families' lives, it really is a no-brainer that we invest in it the same way that we invest in our other public infrastructure pieces, like public schools, like roads and bridges. It truly is foundational to families' economic well-being. And not only that, but we know that it's foundational to the caregivers themselves, that we have to invest in care as infrastructure, and providing high quality supports from professional development, but also wages that families can and providers can use to actually support their own families. We know right now we are asking our early educators to bear the burden of inadequate investment in this system for far too long. We say this all the time, that parents can't afford to pay any more and early educators can't afford to be paid any less. And so treating this as true infrastructure should be able to address those two big things, and also make sure that we have high quality early learning so that children are getting the benefit of all the research that we know that when you have high quality early childhood development, or opportunities for early childhood development in childcare or any setting where a child is receiving care outside of the home, that is good for their well-being on every indicator that we track when it comes to young children's well-being, cognitively, physical health, social, emotional well-being, if it's high quality. So it truly is infrastructure, and it's a game changer. And I hope people will understand that the next time they think about how they're going to get to how people are going to get to work if they don't have childcare. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Myra, that's great. I mean, childcare is literally a win for everybody. I mean, for every single part of it. And I also, the comparison you just made to the public school system is so important. You're absolutely right. We didn't worry. We worried about a lot of things, and we needed to worry about a lot of things, but we did not worry that our public school system would collapse or would have, as you said, an existential crisis. And I often think about, those kids who are 4 years and 364 days old. There's very little difference between them and a 5-year-old and their needs, except that they are not guaranteed a free public education in our country right now. So, and then again, what you just said about a road, childcare is as essential to work as a road or a train or a bus. I think that's a great point. So thank you. And Myra, I actually have one more question for you coming up, and that is that we think about families and their needs and their work schedules and their school schedules, and those needs vary greatly. So I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of a context on how some of these proposals could and should look on the ground, and specifically about the mixed delivery that's needed for families, and that not every family has the same childcare needs in terms of hours and other things. Could you touch on that a little bit as well?
Sure. It's something that I'll draw on something that you just mentioned, that, the child who's 4 years, 364 days old, there's really no difference in them developmentally between, a kindergartner. But also what I often used to say to superintendents when I was commissioner of early childhood in Connecticut, that when a child enters their school as a kindergartner, it doesn't matter where they received their early learning, or it should not matter where they received their early learning. If it was at home with a family friend or neighbor, if it was at home with a parent, if it was at home or in a childcare setting, in a family, a home-based setting, a public school, a private school, whatever. We want to make sure that those children had the best opportunities to learn and grow and thrive, so that when they enter that public school setting, they're ready to hit the ground running and take advantage of all we know the amazing brain development that happens in those first 5 years, those first 3 years in particular. But when we treat our early learning system as something that's very separate for home-based as opposed to something that happens in a public school or in a community-based setting, we're undermining that. Children's brains don't care what we call the care that they receive or where they receive it. What does matter to them is that it's high quality, that it's stimulating and nurturing. So that is one thing that is really important for us to understand. The other piece is that when you invest in one side of this system, so if you invest in pre-K and you create this system where you're putting all your resources there, that is incredible for the families who have 3 and 4-year-olds, right? To be able to get those resources, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and that we don't want to invest in one area of early childhood development to the detriment or to the exclusion of younger years. So we need to make sure that when we build up a mixed delivery system, it's accounting for children of all ages, 0 to 5. And we know that so many young children, babies and toddlers in particular, receive their care in home-based settings, in early Head Starts, right? They're not receiving them in what we consider to be public school pre-K. So we need to make sure that we're thinking of this system broadly. The other thing that's really important to recognize is the economics don't work unless you have a mixed delivery system. I saw this when I was commissioner. We see this across the country, that the programs that have infant and toddler care rely on the preschoolers to make up the difference between the ratios and all of those things that we know are so critical for high quality early learning experiences for babies. But when you siphon off all of the 3-year-olds and have them in another setting that's not supplementing the whole infrastructure, the 0 to 5 infrastructure of a child care program, then you make it untenable for those providers to continue to provide infant and toddler care. The economics, the numbers just don't add up. So it's really important as we're thinking about this, once in a generation investment, that we are doing this from a standpoint where we are, the value is in mixed delivery, and that it is in high quality setting wherever the child is receiving that care.
Thanks, Myra. It's really important to keep in mind. Julie, I'd love to turn back to you and I guess take a step back a little bit, but it feels, and it is true, that we're hearing more about early learning now than we ever have before. So whether that be in the press, on Capitol Hill, in states and communities, can you tell us why you think there's such a focus on early learning right now that I don't think we've seen before?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, nothing about the challenge is new. We've been experiencing these challenges for decades. The only time the United States has ever had a comprehensive childcare plan is during World War II, when it was an economic imperative for, the men were fighting the war, so women had to work. And so the government decided to spend money on it, but we haven't had it since then. So we've been in the same situation. What's different right now is this kind of combination of 5 different factors: the experience of the pandemic, a White House that gets it, like multiple champions in Congress, grassroots organizing that is really coming to a head and coming together, and media attention. And they're all interrelated. And so, with the pandemic, for me, my husband and I found out just how awful we were at teaching kindergarten as our school shut down and we were doing the remote learning. And working parents, around the country lost the supervision they had counted on for their children, and their work was disrupted, which also meant their employers experienced just how important it was that kids are supervised. And so employers got interested in these challenges and how to solve them as well. Women were the ones who were most impacted, either leaving jobs, reducing their work hours, shifting their work hours, to the point where at the height of the pandemic, we were at risk of losing $64.5 billion in women's income as a result of that. And, I think you said the title of this is It's Not Just a Kids Issue. And I think all of these are so interrelated in that, when family income decreases because somebody has to pull back their work, that impacts children and their, well-being. And so having, great childcare settings impacts their well-being. Having families that are stable and financially stable impacts their well-being. So having good childcare really matters. So the pandemic really, kind of, as I've heard others say, like ripped the invisibility cloak over this problem that had been here this whole time. Mm-hmm. And then the White House, the Biden campaign, and then as president came in and gave, talked about this, prioritized it, put it into the plan. We have, more champions in Congress than ever who are prioritizing this and making sure that it's front and center, making sure that it gets into the next big package. We have, angry mothers and overwhelmed fathers and, exhausted grandparents and childcare providers around the country, making sure that their voices are heard and that, it's clear that Congress has to act and solve this problem. And the media, both, I think, because reporters have their own children, and so they've been experiencing this too, and because it's been such a widespread challenge, have really been reporting on this in a way that we haven't seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. It made me laugh when you said exhausted grandparents, because I have 2 of those in my house right now. So yeah. Shout out to them. Thanks for that, Julie. And so in starting to wrap up, we've talked a lot about how the proposals that are out there right now on early learning are unprecedented, and they really are. And I think I keep worrying that there'll be an enormous missed opportunity if we aren't able to capitalize on them. And I think it'll be quite a while before this opportunity comes around again. So I think, practically speaking, can you share any thoughts you have on what anyone who's watching right now can do to help make sure that these investments happen and that we are able to improve the childcare and early learning landscape?
Yes, and just to kind of hit home on your point that this is a unique opportunity, it was literally 50 years ago that we last had this kind of an opportunity where Congress, on a bipartisan basis, passed the Comprehensive Child Development Act, and President Nixon vetoed it. And so we've been sort of waiting and working for these 50 years. I have not personally been doing it for 50 years, but a large chunk of it to, really get to this moment. And so it is so important that we do all that we can to make sure that we capitalize on it. So first, the American Rescue Plan did a lot to stabilize the sector. So there's money that came out from the government, the federal government, that's now in the states. And folks need to make sure that their governors, their legislators, and their administrators know that this money can be spent, it must be spent to stabilize the sector and support families. And that has to happen sooner rather than later, so we have a sector so that we can pay the childcare providers, the superheroes, we can pay them what they're worth. So that's step 1. Step 2 is sharing stories. This is a huge way to be able to see this is not just my childcare challenge. This is not just your childcare challenge. This is not just your parents taking care of your child, right? This is all of our challenge. It is a collective problem that has collective solutions. And let's make sure that we're letting everyone know what those stories are, and then reaching out to members of Congress to tell those stories and to call on them to say there can be no economic recovery in this country if we do not address childcare and early learning.
Thanks, Julie. Myra, do you want to add anything to that? That was a great wrap, but please, do you have anything to add to that?
I muted myself. You would think 18 months into the pandemic. Julie nailed it. I mean, I think she's absolutely right. Yeah, I think you nailed it. We need to make sure that people see this as a collective issue, right? That this is something that is affecting us across the age span. When you think about how many grandparents have stepped in to support families, they want to make sure that childcare is well funded and supported. We know the child development case is clear and strong. We've been at this, as Julie said, for 50 years. I don't even want to think about what would have happened if Nixon hadn't vetoed that. I have not been at this for 50 years like Julie, but it's the time is now, and we really cannot miss this opportunity. We have a crisis. We're in crisis, and we need to come out of this stronger than ever before, because what has happened is clearly, it's showing that it's not tenable.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you, Julie. Thank you both so much for joining us today to share your thoughts and your insights and explaining to everyone here why childcare is not just a kids issue. I really so much appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you to everyone who has been tuning in. Please keep the conversation going, and any comments you want to share on social media. We're using the hashtags Children's Week 2021, and it's a kids issue this week, all week. If you visit firstfocus.org, thank you again for joining us. This has been such a pleasure, and bye for now. Thanks.